I thought I had the perfect family, until one night, I overheard a phone call that changed everything. What I discovered next shattered my world and nearly broke me. Gradually, my awareness returned like a fog lifting from my mind. I started to notice my surroundings again. The dim, shadowy light of my basement workshop seemed to mirror the heaviness in my chest. The only illumination came from the cracked door, spilling a faint glow into the room. One of my tennis rackets sat clamped in the old vise on my workbench, exactly where I'd left it earlier that day. From behind the wall that separated the workshop from the rec room, I could hear the familiar chatter of our two youngest kids, lost in their own little world, giggling and watching a Disney movie on the VCR. I was slumped in my battered old recliner, barely moving, just staring blankly. I glanced at the clock hanging on the wall. It was 12:30. I'd been sitting there, motionless, for over 30 minutes, my mind caught in a loop, replaying something I desperately wished I hadn't heard. That evening had started like any other Sunday. We'd finished dinner and my wife, Sarah, was tidying up the kitchen while I headed downstairs to work on a few rackets. Fall Racquetball League was right around the corner, and I liked to have everything prepped in advance. I'd been playing seriously for about 7 or 8 years now, early mornings before heading to my engineering job at GM, and league matches in the evenings through fall, winter, and spring. Over time, I'd earned a spot in the top brackets and took pride in competing at a high level. I usually did pretty well in local tournaments, often finishing near the top. Playing regularly kept me fit, hovering around 200 pounds, which was decent for my 6 feet 2 inches frame. Our 7-year-old daughter, Jenny, had followed me down to the basement, curling up to watch her favorite movie in the adjacent playroom. And of course her little sister Abby, just 4, trailed right behind her. Abby was in that phase where anywhere Jenny went she had to be right behind. Thankfully Jenny didn't seem to mind, not yet anyway. I was bracing myself for the day when that might change. Our oldest, Jake, was 9 and had already started separating himself from his younger sisters. He was all boy and he knew it. He'd rather be upstairs tinkering with his building sets or getting lost in some imaginary project than hanging around with the little ones. I could make out pieces of her conversation from where I was sitting. The phone wasn't on speaker, but her voice carried just enough. "Tuesday and Thursday 9 to 3, she said. Then she paused, clearly listening to the other person on the line. "Yeah, I can talk. Phil's downstairs with the girls." Another pause. "Wow. I think so too, Debbie. Been thinking about that a lot lately." Her voice faded in and out and I tried not to listen, but it was like my ears tuned in all on their own. Something about halfway down or maybe 4 inches back from the tip this time made me raise an eyebrow. I chuckled to myself. I remembered a conversation from a while back when John, a guy I used to play ball with, told me about this wart he had. He said it had been there for years, but lately it had grown and it was freaking his wife out. John, though, claimed it was actually useful. Swore it gave extra stimulation during missionary depending on the angle. He jokingly called it his pleaser, which was just about the last thing I expected to hear from a guy like him. Meanwhile, life at home was getting heavier by the week. Sarah was trying to juggle everything, half days at her job, wrangling 3 kids, keeping the house running, and it was wearing her down. I wasn't much help, to be honest. I was deep in a major project at work and logging overtime almost every day. Things reached a breaking point one night. The house was quiet, the kids all asleep, and I found her crumpled on the couch, just weeping, completely drained. I went over, wrapped my arms around her, and just held her. We sat like that until the tears stopped. Eventually she opened up about how overwhelmed she was and we talked through it. A few days later she came through the door after running errands or something, and before I could even say a word she threw her arms around my neck and planted this big, wet kiss on me. I wasn't expecting it, so I just stood there. Then she leaned back, looked straight into my eyes, gave me that familiar smile and said, "What's wrong, hon? You sound kind of off." Caught off guard, I muttered something lame about discovering a crack in one of my favorite rackets. But in that moment, I was searching her eyes, trying desperately to read something, anything, that might confirm the uneasy feeling growing inside me. But there was nothing. Just Sarah, smiling, calm, the same woman I'd loved for years. Back in high school, I wasn't the smartest kid in class, but I held my own. My sister always did better than me grade-wise, but I found my own path. Drafting was where I really found my stride. By senior year, I had taken every drafting course offered. That's when it clicked. I wanted to be an engineer. And I chased that dream all the way through. I ended up enrolling at the local junior college, not because it was my dream school but because it made sense. They had a solid engineering technology program, tuition was affordable, and I could still live at home and drive back and forth. Jace, my buddy from high school, hadn't figured out his path yet, but he decided to sign up too and give it a shot alongside me. After a while, I wasn't feeling connected to much of anything or anyone, so I threw myself into my coursework. I loaded up on drafting classes and spent most of my free time holed up, buried in assignments. About a year into it, with the Vietnam War slowly winding down and troop numbers shrinking, I decided to apply for an early discharge to go back to school full-time. The Army approved my request and I got out 5 months ahead of schedule after serving for 2 years and 7 months. I moved back in with my folks and enrolled in the engineering tech program at the state university closest to home. That's where things started to shift. One day, while killing time between classes, I struck up a conversation with this girl. After we'd been chatting for a while, she suddenly stopped, smiled a little shyly and said, "I just realized, I've been talking your ear off and don't even know your name." I reached out to shake her hand, feeling a bit awkward, and said, "I'm Phil. Phil Robinson." She laughed and said, "Nice to meet you, Phil. I'm Sally Baxter." Turned out we both had these long breaks between classes on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Over the next few weeks, we spent most of that time sitting and talking. I ended up hearing her whole life story, about her parents, her older sisters, all the little things that made her who she was. I remember one particular afternoon when the three of us, me, Sally, and a guy named Jack, were sitting around talking. Jack suddenly turned and said, "So you're a Vietnam vet?" "Yeah, I was over there for a bit," I answered, feeling a little uneasy. "What did you do?" he asked. "I worked fire direction control for a 155mm artillery battery," I told him. Jack nodded, impressed. 155s, huh? Backbone of the artillery. Tough job. Then Emily, another classmate, jumped in. "You'll have to excuse Jack, he's kind of obsessed with military history. Follows all of it." Back then, for the first time in a long while, I started to believe that maybe things were going to be okay. That maybe, just maybe, I had a shot at building a real life, with someone who cared about me. She loved me and I loved her back. That night, after we left the motel, exhausted both physically and emotionally in the early hours of the morning, we already knew. We didn't need time to think it over or space to figure things out. We just knew we wanted to spend the rest of our lives together. That night was full of long, honest conversations. We laid everything on the table, our thoughts on marriage, children, where we'd want to build a home, and the dreams we had for our futures. Even though Sally was a year younger than me, she was actually ahead in school and set to graduate that spring. Life moved quickly after that. When Jason was born, Sally shifted to part-time work and moved into retail. She still wanted to stay active in the workforce, even if it was only a few hours a week between having kids. Her plan was always to return to full-time once they were all in school. At the time, she was working somewhere between 12 and 20 hours a week, which helped. The employee discount came in handy, especially with how fast the kids grew out of their clothes. Meanwhile, my job kept evolving. I'd started out on the ground floor and over time worked my way up, one small advancement after another. Then came Wednesday. I couldn't shake the feeling something wasn't right. I needed answers, real ones. I decided to try and quietly check on John and Craig, to see where they had actually been that Saturday. So, from work, I called John's house. His wife answered. I told her I was part of his racquetball league and wanted to see if he was free to play this coming Saturday. She told me, as far as she knew, he had a business conference in Detroit that afternoon and wouldn't be back until Sunday. My stomach dropped. That was all I needed to hear to confirm what my gut had been screaming. If I hadn't been sure before, I was now. My hands trembled. The anger in me flared hotter, more insistent, a voice in my head whispering louder than ever, "Do something." That evening at dinner, I sat quietly while the kids chatted away like nothing was wrong. Their laughter and innocent stories filled the room, and Sally, she didn't seem to notice a thing. She carried on like always, unaware of the storm inside me. I could barely hold myself together. I kept wondering, is this it? Is this the last time we'll ever sit down together like this, as a family? The thought hit hard and I turned my head quickly, trying to hide the tears welling up in my eyes. The next day, I followed up with the same quiet desperation. I told her I'd call back later and hung up. Then I just sat there, staring at the phone in my hand, fighting back the fury building in my chest. It wasn't just anger, it was something darker. Something terrifying. A rage I hadn't felt in years was clawing its way back to the surface, and it scared me. I got up without really thinking, my body moving on autopilot. I walked slowly down the stairs into my basement workshop. There, behind the old wooden cabinet, I pulled out the key and unlocked the door to the gun safe. I just stood there for a while, staring inside. My dad's old 16-gauge double-barrel shotgun sat quietly, alongside my Winchester 73-06 hunting rifle and even the old pellet gun he gave me when I was just a kid. The shotgun had sentimental weight. He passed it down to me back when he and Mom moved into a smaller place and didn't have room for it anymore. I didn't touch anything. I just looked. My mind was spinning again, trying to make sense of the mess, trying to answer questions I didn't even know how to ask. What exactly was happening? Who was betraying whom? What kind of sick game had I found myself in? Room 168 kept flashing in my mind like a bad movie scene on repeat. And that voice, that same voice that had been whispering in my head all week, was now shouting. Do something. Anything. But what could I do? It was already too late. They were too familiar, too comfortable. This hadn't been a one-time mistake. It was clear now. I couldn't undo what she'd done. 10 years of marriage. A decade of building a life and raising kids together. And she tossed it all aside, me included. My thoughts spiraled into something darker. In that rage-fueled fog, I found myself holding a knife. I don't even remember picking it up. I imagined walking into that room, pressing the blade to his cheek, then dragging it gently down the side of his face to his neck, right along the carotid. A fine red line followed the edge. It would be so easy, I thought. So easy, and so tempting. I imagined the look in John's eyes, wide with terror, the moment he realized just how close to the edge he was. Then the stench hit me. Even in my imagination I could feel the shift, the panic in him, his body giving out. His bowels had let go. Then the sound of the shower stopped. A moment later I heard her voice, Sally's voice, floating out through the bathroom door. Hey Johnny boy, weren't you gonna get in here with me? The sarcasm rolled off my tongue before I could stop it. Maybe I'll tell him myself. I imagined tossing the phone into the corner of the room, hearing it clatter uselessly. Then stepping out, closing the door behind me, shutting away that entire chapter of my life. I stood outside in the cool night air, letting it fill my lungs. I looked up at the sky, and for the first time in days the tension in my chest started to loosen. The voice was quiet now. The storm had passed. I knew what had to come next. There was only one path forward and I had to walk it. Alone. I headed purposefully toward my car, the weight of finality grounding every step. Later, when I confronted her, she tried to brush it off with a laugh. Come on Phil, your dad's seen you naked before. What's the big deal? But I just stared at her and she froze. Jack was in the room too, his head slowly shaking. He looked at me like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Neither could I. I gave a small shrug and looked Sally straight in the eyes. All right, Sally. How about this? Take off your blouse. Just the blouse. Nothing else. She didn't move. She just sat there, frozen, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. That look, it was the look of someone who knew there was no more hiding. Jack, who had been watching silently, suddenly bristled with anger. That's enough, Phil. This isn't right, you're being cruel and disrespectful now. I turned my gaze from Sally to Jack, locking eyes with him. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Jack stepped forward slightly, his voice quieter but more urgent. Look, I get it. Do what you have to do. Just, please don't hurt her. That hit me in the chest. I stood there for a moment, letting the weight of it all settle. Then I spoke, my voice heavy with weariness. No, Jack. I'm way past that now. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the knife, slipped it back into its sheath and handed it to him. No words. Just an offering. Jack took it silently, nodding slightly, his shoulders slumping under the weight of everything he'd just witnessed. He turned toward the door, already thinking about what he'd have to say to Emily, and how he'd ever explain what just happened. As the door clicked shut behind him, the phone started ringing. Neither of us moved. We just sat there, completely still. The phone kept ringing, but it felt like noise from another world. Sometime later, Sally began speaking again, her voice low, almost mechanical. She looked away and said, that Saturday night, John and Craig came by the restaurant. We had dinner, a few drinks. Then we went out dancing. She paused. We ended up at a nightclub. We kind of paired off. I was with John. I'd had more to drink than I should have. And I guess I convinced myself nothing bad would happen. Everyone was having fun. It all just felt so easy. Her voice cracked a little, but she kept going. Later, when we went back to the motel, we didn't even talk about it. John and I just went to one room. Debbie and Craig went to another. She stopped. Her hands folded tightly in her lap, her gaze locked on nothing. She didn't cry. She just stared. I couldn't even bring myself to speak. I was too tired, too broken. It wasn't just about that night anymore. It was the unraveling of everything we'd built, piece by piece. I thought about Dave and Debbie, how things had blown apart for them too. They'd been together all through college, got married a year after Debbie graduated. Then, on their first anniversary, Dave found out she'd been cheating the whole time. Not just once, but through their entire relationship. He kicked her out, filed for divorce, and cut ties. Debbie's parents even turned on her over it. Later, Dave met Sarah. They fell in love, got married, had a couple of kids, and as far as I knew, they were happy now. Of course, Debbie had never told Josh, her new boyfriend, about any of it. I snapped back to the moment, looking over at Sally. She still hadn't moved. The silence between us felt endless. And in my heart, I knew this wasn't going to be over anytime soon. Not in 5 years. Not in 10. Every time I looked at her, I'd remember. I'm going to think about last night every time I hear your voice, I said, my throat tight with emotion. And whenever someone says your name, I'll remember last night. My voice cracked. Tears welled up as I stood there, not moving, barely breathing. That was what I couldn't live with. Sally sat across from me, rocking slowly back and forth in her chair. Her hands were clenched, her face contorted with pain. She was sobbing, muttering, "No. Please no. God no," over and over like a prayer she already knew wouldn't be answered. Minutes passed in silence before I spoke again, this time quietly. "Can you even imagine bringing that back to our bed?" I didn't have to say what that was. We both knew. And though I never brought it up, I had always known she hadn't been with just me. There were signs, early on, but I'd buried them, choosing to believe in what we were building together. We got through those early years. We both landed good jobs in the fields we'd studied, and life felt solid. I had to travel from time to time, but nothing too serious, 3-day trips at most. We settled into a rhythm. Then, the day after her 26th birthday, Amy told me she was pregnant. I was stunned. We'd agreed to wait until we turned 30 before starting a family. But she said it just happened, and she seemed excited, so I tried to match her energy. Still, something about the timing sat oddly with me, but I brushed it off, just life not following a plan. Years later, I found myself living another version of the same nightmare. I had just gotten back from a work trip, earlier than expected. I dropped my car off at the dealership for a brake recall before heading to the airport and taking a cab home, figuring I'd pick it up the next day. I knew what I was walking into the moment I stepped through the door. I moved through the house quietly, pulling out my phone and setting it to camera mode. I walked into the living room, and there they were, Amy and her supervisor. The same guy I'd shaken hands with at her office Christmas parties, company barbecues, and social gatherings. The same man I'd trusted around my wife. She had no idea I was home. Later, when I confronted her, I didn't yell. I didn't rage. I just asked why. She told me it wasn't about me, not really. "You're amazing in bed," she said. "We've always had great intimacy." But then she added, "It's just, he gives me something you can't." My stomach dropped. "What exactly?" I asked. She looked away and whispered, "Size." According to her, this man had 11 inches. "And those 11 inches do things for me that you can't," she said, like it was just some uncomfortable fact like the weather. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. She tried to salvage what she could, saying, "We've had a great life until now. There's no reason we can't still have that, can't keep living like we used to." But everything inside me had already cracked wide open. There was no going back. I told myself I didn't mind her being with him, for now. I wasn't going to act until I had proof in hand. Cold, solid evidence. Once I had that, I'd confront him face to face. That night, I went upstairs and began moving my things out of our bedroom. I didn't want to sleep next to her anymore, not when I couldn't trust her. I carried my clothes down the hall and started hanging my suits in the guest room closet. That's when a thought hit me, one I hadn't considered before, and it shook me. I remembered something Amy had said during one of our fights. She was angry, shouting that if I didn't like it, I could leave. She'd said, "Hal can move in here with me and the kids." At the time, I didn't think much of it, I was too stunned by everything else. But now it echoed differently. Me and the kids. Not our kids. Hers. Was she trying to say they weren't mine? I pushed that thought aside for the moment, but it stayed with me. I needed to see it with my own eyes. Just like people said, seeing is believing. I guess it was my turn now. Funny enough, this wasn't Hal's first time causing trouble with what he was packing. Apparently, he'd gotten into a similar mess before. The last time, she forgave him. Told him if it ever happened again it was over. But she didn't follow through. I wasn't planning to give her that chance this time. I was going to find him, and when I did, I wasn't sure I'd be able to hold back. The anger in me had reached a boiling point. I might not just throw him out, I might put him in the hospital. And if he ended up there, maybe Amy could bring all his stuff and stack it up next to his bed. I didn't care anymore. If I caught him, he was getting kicked out 500 feet from the house if I had any say in it. Her attorney was lightning fast. Clearly better prepared than Mike, my lawyer. In fairness, Mike didn't know how urgent this had become, and honestly neither did I until it all blew up. I pulled up to the house one afternoon and saw Amy standing in the doorway, arms folded, smirking at me like she'd already won. I backed the car out of the driveway, drove down to the corner and called Mike. I updated him and asked what I needed to do to get back inside and retrieve my things. He said he'd talk to a few contacts he had in the sheriff's department and get back to me. Meanwhile, Hal, Amy's supervisor, ended up getting fired. Apparently her claims backfired. She told HR that Hal had coerced her, that he threatened to tank her career if she didn't give in. The company didn't buy it. They upheld her termination. Amy wasn't done though. She got a lawyer and filed a wrongful termination suit against the company. It looked like she and Hal had agreed to play that card, try to shift the blame. But the whole time they were putting on that act, they were still living together. Still in the house. 3 weeks after I got served, we were already back in court for the hearing to extend the restraining order she'd filed. And just like that, any hope I had of seeing that part of my life again, my home, my kids, my peace, was buried under paperwork and lies. As for the money, I've given up on ever seeing that again. I figured I could buy myself some time, maybe stretch things out for a few weeks before the courts forced my hand. Even if they hauled me in and threatened contempt, I probably could have delayed it another week or two. The day after our hearing, Mike gave me a call. He said Amy's former employer had come forward with a settlement offer. It's a bit low, he admitted, but we might be able to push for more. Then he added, it's your call. You know the situation better than anyone. Truth be told, I didn't really care about the money anymore. What I cared about was justice, and I wasn't finding any of it in the system. I had to seek it on my own. The law. It failed me. The legal system is a joke in cases like mine. My wife cheats on me for years, raises kids that aren't even mine, and somehow I'm the one who gets punished. The courts handed her the house. Ordered me to cover the bills. And while I'm doing that, she moves her lover in. I was literally paying for the guy who helped ruin my life to have a place to live. On top of that, they tacked on alimony. And when the divorce was finalized, she took half of everything I spent my life building. Then Amy had the audacity to look me in the eye and say, "You're still their father, Rob. You've loved those kids since they were born. That love doesn't just disappear." And I wanted to believe that. I did. But I looked at her and said, "Amy, if I give you money for food, it won't just be feeding the kids, it'll be feeding you and Hal too." I could never bring myself to raise a hand to her, no matter how angry or betrayed I felt. I'd loved her for too long. That's why I did what I did to Hal instead. That's why he's still going to the doctor. Marcia, our old neighbor, told me Hal's been in to see Dr. Marlin several times. Apparently he's got complications. Real ones. She said I did a number on him, his words, not mine. He's struggling now. Can't perform. Can't keep anything working the way he used to. And I'll be honest, it brings me a kind of grim satisfaction. Knowing that the one thing he used to betray me with is now useless. It might be petty, but in some way it feels like balance. Amy, for all her smug confidence, isn't getting any pleasure out of what she chose. And I guess that's something. She betrayed you, Susan said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. She cheated on you? For that? Oh yeah, I replied bitterly. She sure did. We sat there in silence for a while. Then Susan, my youngest, looked up at me, her eyes full of confusion and hurt, and asked the question that would haunt me for years. Why did you hurt our father? My chest tightened. I thought I was your father, I said softly. But Mommy told us you weren't, she whispered. She said Daddy Hal is our real father. I looked over at Amy. She was leaning against the wall, arms crossed, a smug little smile on her face like she'd been waiting for this moment. I couldn't bear it. I turned from the kids and walked toward the door. As I passed her, she called out sweetly, "Don't forget to come back soon." That was the final straw. I snatched the envelope from her hand and hissed through clenched teeth, "Eat and rot, you worthless coward." From there, everything escalated. I was arrested not long after. The courts moved quickly, quicker than I could have imagined. They argued that since the children were biologically Hal's and he and Amy were planning to marry, removing me from the equation wouldn't disrupt the kids' lives. In fact, they claimed it would be better for them to be with their real family. The judge awarded Amy full use of the family home until the children turned 18. After that, the house could be sold and the proceeds divided between us. There was one caveat: if she remarried, the house could be sold earlier. Alimony wasn't dropped completely, just reduced. and I was still ordered to continue supporting the home financially. But life has a strange way of correcting itself. Turns out Hal wasn't quite the family man Amy had hoped for. As soon as things got hard and she couldn't keep a roof over his head, he packed up and left her behind. I still don't understand how they tried to charge me with arson. It was my house. And I made sure the insurance policy was canceled, so no fraud, no payout. The bank wasn't thrilled since they were now holding a loan with no property to back it up. But I just sent in the monthly payment. As long as I kept paying, they couldn't touch me. Then I heard about another case, eerily similar. A husband, blindsided by betrayal, didn't grab a phone like I did. He grabbed a gun. Killed them both, his wife and the man she cheated with. Our state doesn't have the death penalty, so he got 20 years to life. I've never met him. But every month I send a carton of cigarettes to his facility. Tucked inside is a simple thank you card. With Amy gone, I went back to court and petitioned for custody of the kids. And I won. They live with me now. It's not perfect, we've still got a lot of healing to do, but we're together. And somehow in all the wreckage we're finding our way back. They say, all's well that ends well. And for some of us, I guess that's true.